Thanksgiving night 2023, I learned what my own daughter really thought of me. After 65 years on this earth, 32 of them spent mopping hallways and scrubbing gum off lockers as a school janitor, I sat at my daughter's table in Madison, Wisconsin, and got reduced to something less than a father, less than a man. She looked across the table, wine glass in her hand, and with a smirk that told me she wasn't joking, she said to her husband, "See? Dad's basically the maid of this family." Everyone chuckled. I didn't. I heard it sharp and clear, and it landed like a stone in my chest. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I can still see it. The table covered in paper Dixie plates because she didn't want to waste dishes. The smell of turkey that came from a pre-ordered Hy-Vee catering tray. The flicker of those fake candles from Target sitting in glass jars. None of it mattered, because her words drowned it all out. Maid. Like the years I worked double shifts. The years I patched up our roof with my own hands. The years I sat through parent-teacher conferences smelling of bleach. All of it added up to maid. I put my fork down. Nobody noticed. My son-in-law Mark, with his new Patagonia vest, laughed and said, "Well, at least you're good at it." My grandkids were too busy on their iPads. I excused myself and started clearing plates, because that's what I always do. Old habit. The habit that made her joke sound true. The more I scraped plates into the trash, the more my ears caught snatches of their conversation. Claire bragging about her promotion, Mark talking about refinancing their house at 6.7%, and then the vacation. "We booked the Northwoods Resort again," she said. "It's basically ours at this point. I can't imagine a summer without it." My stomach turned. They never once invited me, even though it's only a 3-hour drive from my place in Eagle River. Every July, I watch other families load their boats onto trailers, headed north, while I sit on my porch, alone. I rinsed a casserole dish and felt my hand shake. Maid. That's how she framed me. And yet here she was, staking ownership over a place she rents 2 weeks a year. That word, ours, rang in my ears. I looked down at the cracked skin on my knuckles, the kind of hands that don't belong to a servant, but to a man who kept a roof overhead when the mortgage almost swallowed us in '94. I tried to swallow it down, told myself she was joking, but my phone buzzed in my pocket and something made me pull it out. I typed the name of that resort into Google. There it was, in bold letters, for sale, $2.3 million. My breath caught. The same place she called ours could actually be mine. The dish slipped in the sink with a clang. Nobody turned around. You want to know the worst part? A piece of me still wanted to believe my daughter didn't mean it, that maybe she was just careless with words. But another piece, the tired, worn-down part, saw that listing and thought, maybe this is the only way she'll ever look at me differently. Maybe this is how I stop being her maid. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and stared out the kitchen window at the frost creeping up the glass. My heart was pounding, not from anger this time, but from possibility. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something. Something that could change the balance in this family forever. And right there, with a sink full of dishes behind me and laughter spilling out of the dining room, I whispered to myself, what if I actually did it? That's when the idea stopped being a daydream. That's when it started to become a plan. When I finally walked back into that dining room, I wasn't the same man who had carried their plates. I had already decided that the next summer, when they showed up to their precious resort, they'd find out it didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to me. When I got home that night, my little one-bedroom apartment in Eagle River felt colder than usual. The radiator clanked like it always does in late November, but it didn't matter. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled the thin curtain aside, and stared out at the frozen parking lot. Claire's words kept replaying. Maid, over and over. I opened the metal lockbox I keep under my bed. Inside were documents that almost no one in my family knows about. My wife's life insurance payout from 2017, $750,000. A number that still feels unreal, though every dollar of it came from her not being here anymore. I never touched it beyond funeral costs. Added to that was my retirement IRA, a 401k I had nursed through the 2008 crash, and some savings bonds I bought back in the 90s. All told, close to $2 million just sitting there, waiting for me to either waste away on medical bills or use for something bigger. For years I told myself it was for the kids, college funds, weddings, emergencies. Yet what good did it do? Claire married a man who sneered at my work shirts, and my son moved to Denver and barely calls. I sacrificed, and in return I became invisible. I remembered my wife's voice, her last real words to me in that Mayo Clinic room. One day do something just for yourself, not for them. I never listened. Until now. The next morning, I drove through ice fog to Associated Bank on Division Street. The lobby smelled like new carpet and burnt coffee. The branch manager, a man named Tom, recognized me. I'd kept his locker clean when he was still in high school. He shook my hand and said, "Mr. Daniels, you were the guy who always fixed the leaky sinks." "I owe you." That alone almost broke me. Somebody remembered. I showed him the listing for Northwoods Resort. He raised his eyebrows. "That's a big leap." I told him I had collateral, life insurance funds, retirement accounts. He went quiet, then nodded slowly. "You can do this. You'd even qualify for favorable terms because of your age and assets." It was the first time in decades someone spoke to me like I had power. But I'll admit, guilt gnawed at me. What kind of father uses his dead wife's insurance money to prove a point to his daughter? I drove back past the frozen lakes, where ice fishermen sat in their shacks with Pabst Blue Ribbon cans at their feet, normal men enjoying their time. Meanwhile, I was scheming like a chess player, moving pawns against his own blood. Still, the thought wouldn't let me go. That resort wasn't just a building. It was their pride, their tradition, the place Claire bragged about in her office, the place her kids called our summer home. And it was for sale. It felt like fate, or maybe temptation. I spent weeks digging into the numbers. The resort brought in steady revenue from fishing tournaments, family reunions, and wedding parties. July alone brought in nearly $400,000. I ran spreadsheets on an old Dell laptop, typing with fingers that had once pushed brooms. The math worked, more than worked. By January, I had signed the first round of paperwork. The deposit was $150,000. When I slid that cashier's check across the bank desk, my hand shook, not from fear, but from release, like chains falling off. Tom clapped my shoulder. "Congratulations, sir." "You're about to own a piece of this town." I drove home through the snowstorm with the heater blasting, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I could almost hear my wife's laugh. I could almost hear her saying, "Finally." But then doubt came crashing back. Was I betraying my daughter the same way she betrayed me? Was I turning into something bitter and vengeful? I wrestled with it late at night, sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of Jack Daniels I almost never touch. Staring at those contracts, I felt both shame and pride. I was doing something monumental. But for what? To prove to a 36-year-old woman that her father was more than a maid? Then I remembered the look on her face when she said it, the casual cruelty of it, the way everyone chuckled while I stood there with dishes in my hands. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was truth revealed, and truth deserves an answer. So I pressed forward. I scheduled inspections. I met with the resort staff. The current owners, an older couple ready to retire to Florida, shook my hand like I was their savior. "You'll take good care of this place," they said. I promised I would. Every night I pictured Claire walking up to that check-in desk with her husband in his Patagonia vest, expecting their usual suite with the lake view. I pictured her face when the clerk said, "The new owner would like to greet you personally." That image kept me warm through the Wisconsin winter. And yet, here's where I want you to think. Was I right? Was it fair to take something she loved, not to share it, but to make her pay? Is revenge against your own blood justice, or is it cruelty disguised as pride? I won't answer that yet. What I can tell you is by the time spring thaw came, I was no longer the man who left that Thanksgiving dinner humiliated. I was someone else, someone my daughter had never met before. And when summer rolled around, when she pulled up to that resort with her Highlander full of luggage, she didn't walk into the tradition she bragged about. She walked straight into my trap. Spring in Eagle River comes slow, like the ice on the lake is reluctant to give up. By April, I'd already signed the full purchase agreement, $2,300,000. My hands still tremble, remembering the pen gliding across those contracts. It didn't feel real until the seller slid the keys across the mahogany desk and said, "She's yours now." She meant the resort, but I heard it like a benediction. Mine. I drove straight to Northwoods Resort that afternoon. The snow was melting into gray slush, boats still covered with tarps, docks slick with leftover ice. The cabins stood quiet, shutters closed, but I could see it. July, families grilling brats, kids chasing each other with sparklers, fishermen dragging coolers full of walleye up the dock. And in my mind, I saw Claire, strutting into the lobby like she owned the place. That was the moment I knew. My revenge was no longer an idea. It was brick and mortar, timber, and lakefront. Still, the guilt gnawed. I kept telling myself this was business, a smart investment, retirement security, but deep down I knew it wasn't just that. It was personal. Every nail in that boathouse, every cedar beam of the lodge, carried a message. I'm not your maid. Owning the place wasn't enough. I had to learn it. So I started spending nights there, walking the property with the maintenance crew, studying the books in the office. The staff was mostly locals, college kids working summers, a bartender who remembered me from the high school football games I used to clean up after. "Mr. Daniels, you're the new boss?" Never thought I'd see the day they said it with respect, not pity. That alone was worth something. But here's where it gets tricky. The resort was more than a business. It was a piece of local heritage. Weddings, anniversaries, fishing tournaments. It meant something to people. Was it right to use a place so full of community memories just to teach my daughter a lesson? Or was I, in some twisted way, protecting it from people like her, who saw it only as a backdrop for Instagram posts and bragging rights at the office? I wrestled with that question every night. Then came the foreshadowing moment I couldn't shake. While sorting through old files in the office, I found a binder labeled Preferred Guests. There, in neat handwriting, was Claire's name. Her family had booked the same lakeside suite 8 years in a row. 8 years. It was practically a family shrine. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a vacation spot to her. It was her stage, the place she showed off the perfect family life I was never really part of. And now I held the deed. In May, I made small but deliberate changes. Raised the rates on premium suites. Introduced a stricter cancellation policy. Nothing outrageous, just enough to make her notice. I told myself it was sound business. But let's be honest, I was setting the chessboard. The weeks dragged by, tension coiled tighter with each passing day. My son called once, asked how I was doing. I told him about the resort. He laughed like it was a midlife crisis come late. "Dad, what are you going to do? Start serving cocktails?" He didn't get it. None of them did. This wasn't about money or cocktails. It was about reclaiming something they'd stripped away, my dignity. By June, the lake thawed fully. Boats buzzed on weekends. Kids lined up for ice cream at the dockside shack. I sat on the deck of the main lodge, sipping black coffee from a resort mug, and watched it all unfold like a movie. The staff had started calling me Mr. D. It made me smile, though part of me wondered if I was slipping into the role of the very thing my daughter accused me of, the help. Was I proving her wrong or proving her right in a bigger arena? Then came the phone call that turned my doubts into fire. It was Claire. She spoke casually, like I was just a background character. Dad, we're booked for July. Same suite, same 2 weeks. Kids are excited. You should stop by sometime, not a trace of awareness. Not a thank you. Just assumption. That she had her tradition secured. That I was still on the outside looking in. I hung up and stared at the guest ledger, my thumb pressed against her reservation line. For a moment I thought about canceling it, blocking her out completely. But no, that was too easy. She needed to walk in, full of pride, full of certainty, and then watch it collapse. She needed to see me, not as her maid, but as the man holding the keys. And yet, here's the part that still twists my gut. Was I setting myself up for a final break with her? Was I trading the last fragile threads of our bond for the satisfaction of a single moment? My wife would have told me to forgive, to let it go, but she wasn't here, and forgiveness had become a language I didn't know how to speak anymore. So I locked the binder back in the desk drawer, finished my coffee, and whispered to the empty lobby, "She'll learn." And when the 4th of July fireworks lit up the lake, when Claire stepped through those resort doors expecting champagne and lake views, she wasn't walking into a vacation. She was walking straight into the reckoning I had been building all year. The 4th of July weekend hit like thunder. Minocqua swelled with tourists hauling coolers and towing pontoons, fireworks stands popping up in parking lots. At Northwoods Resort, every room was booked, the docks stacked with jet skis, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and suntan lotion. I walked the property with a clipboard in hand, but my pulse thudded like a war drum because I knew this wasn't just another busy holiday. This was the day my daughter would come face to face with me, not as her maid, but as the man who owned every plank of the dock she thought was hers. I still remember her Highlander pulling into the circular drive, luggage strapped to the roof, kids bouncing in the back seat, Mark in his mirrored sunglasses stepping out like he was some big shot on Wall Street instead of a mid-level HR director. Claire strutted up the front steps, chin high, already rehearsing the brag she'd tell her friends back in Madison, our summer tradition at the lake resort. She didn't even look at the people unloading their cars around her. She thought she owned the place. The front desk clerk, a college kid named Tyler, smiled nervously when she announced her name. He glanced at me through the glass office door. I gave a slight nod. That was the cue. Tyler cleared his throat. The new owner would like to greet you personally," Claire laughed. "New owner? That's cute. Well, tell him we'll take our suite now." And then I stepped out, my button-down shirt tucked in, keys jangling at my side, the deed practically burning in my pocket. Her face drained of color in an instant. "Dad?" "Welcome to my resort," I said evenly. "You can still stay, at the full rate, of course." The silence was sharp. Mark's sunglasses slid down his nose. My grandkids froze, eyes darting from their mom to me. I saw Claire's lips twitch, fighting between outrage and disbelief. Finally, she stammered, "This is yours? Since when?" "Since March," I said, pulling out the office binder and laying it open to her reservation line. "And since you told everyone I was just the maid of this family." Her jaw clenched. "You bought this to spite me?" That was the dagger question, the one that every person listening at the front desk wanted answered. I kept my voice steady. "I bought it because I'm not invisible. Not to this town, not to myself, and definitely not to you." The kids shifted uncomfortably. Mark muttered something about leaving, but Claire snapped, "No, we're staying." Her pride wouldn't let her walk away. That's when it hit me. The revenge wasn't in denying her the room. The revenge was in watching her live in my shadow for 2 straight weeks. They checked in, but the atmosphere was poisoned from the start. Every server, every dockhand, every bartender greeted me as Mr. D in front of her. I could see the humiliation burning her cheeks. At the 4th of July cookout, when townsfolk raised their beers to me, "Congrats on saving the resort, Mr. Daniels." She stood there with a paper plate of brats, looking like she'd swallowed glass. And I'll admit it, part of me reveled in it. Every smile from a guest, every pat on the back was a reminder that I was more than the word she spat at Thanksgiving. But late at night, lying in the lodge owner's suite, I also felt a pang. Was I destroying whatever little bond we had left? Was I turning the knife too far? The breaking point came on July 7th. Claire stormed into my office, slamming the door. "Do you realize what you've done? My kids think you're some kind of hero now. They keep saying that Grandpa owns the lake. You've made me look like a fool." I leaned back in the chair that once belonged to the old owners and said, "No, Claire, you did that yourself." She glared, eyes glassy with tears she didn't want to show. "You could have just asked to come with us. You didn't have to humiliate me." That's when the final truth spilled out at me. "You didn't humiliate me, Claire. You erased me. And this," I tapped the deed on the desk, "this was the only way left to remind you who I am." She stood there trembling, caught between apology and rage, then stormed out without saying another word. Later that night, as fireworks burst over the lake and their reflections glittered on the water, I sat alone on the boathouse steps. The crowd cheered, families laughed, but my chest felt heavy. Revenge had tasted sweet, but it also left an aftertaste of ash. I watched Claire holding her kids by the shore, her face stiff, her posture tight. The wedge between us was now a canyon. And yet, as I sat there with the boom of fireworks in my chest, I knew the reckoning wasn't finished, because what happened next, what she did after those 2 weeks ended, would shake me harder than her words ever had. When those 2 weeks ended, Claire left the resort with her head held high, but her eyes betrayed her. Pride can only carry you so far when every guest and every staff member saw you shrink under your father's shadow. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the revenge had run its course. But a storm was still brewing, one that would give me the closure I never dared imagine. A week later, an envelope arrived at my office, a letter from Claire's lawyer. She was contesting my ownership, claiming I'd manipulated the sale, that I wasn't mentally fit to handle a multi-million-dollar property. Reading those words, I felt the old ache in my chest. My own daughter trying to strip me of what I'd built, not with sweat and work this time, but with ink and paper. Instead of breaking me, it lit a fire. I gathered everything, the signed contracts, my financial records, the letter from the bank manager, even statements from the previous owners, who were happy to vouch for my clear head and steady hand. And then I remembered something she'd forgotten, those little slips of arrogance she left behind. Social media posts bragging about our family resort. Receipts she'd submitted for work reimbursement, claiming it was a business retreat. I turned them over to my lawyer. Suddenly the case wasn't about me, it was about her fabricating expenses. When the court date came in late August, I walked into that small county courthouse in Rhinelander, wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn to my wife's funeral. Claire sat across the aisle, lips tight, Mark whispering in her ear. For the first time, she wasn't holding the high ground. The judge listened, stone-faced, as her attorney painted me as a confused old janitor who didn't understand what he was doing. And then he looked over the mountain of paperwork I'd brought. Contracts signed, notarized, witnessed, bank statements showing funds in order, testimonials from staff, even old students who'd written letters saying I'd never been sharper. Finally, my lawyer dropped the stack of Claire's reimbursement forms onto the table with a heavy slap. The courtroom went silent. Her attorney stammered. She looked at the floor, and the judge's gavel came down hard. My ownership upheld, her case dismissed, and a note forwarded to the IRS for further review. That was the real twist. In trying to ruin me, she exposed herself. Word spread fast in her office back in Madison. HR director caught claiming personal vacations as corporate retreats. By September, she was let go. Not fired, not publicly shamed, but quietly escorted out. Reputation in tatters, savings drained on lawyer fees. I didn't cheer when I heard. I just sat in the resort office, staring out at the lake as the first leaves of fall drifted down. She had tried to erase me, and in the end she erased herself. The guests kept coming. The town kept nodding at me like I'd pulled off a miracle. But inside, I felt something different. Not triumph, not bitterness, just release. For decades, I'd carried the weight of being invisible. Now, at last, the world, and my own blood, saw me clearly. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that respect isn't given out of obligation. It's earned, and it's protected. I learned the hard way that silence invites erasure, and sometimes the only way to reclaim your place is to stand taller than the people trying to shrink you. I wonder, though, have you ever been treated like you were invisible in your own family? Have you ever had to fight for respect that should have been yours all along? Share your story in the comments. I'll be here reading them because no one deserves to feel unseen. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stay close and subscribe. Because this journey of hurt, revenge, and healing isn't just mine. It might be yours too.